You are listening to the SDSU Football Podcast, presented by the East Village Times, with your hosts Andre Hagverdian and Paul Garrison. Welcome, listeners, to another episode of the SDSU Football Podcast. I am Andre Hagverdian, and I'm joined, as always, by Paul Garrison. Our guest today is San Diego State defensive coordinator Kurt Mattix. Kurt Mattix will be entering his third season as a defensive coordinator at San Diego State. He also coaches the Aztec linebackers. In the first two seasons as defensive coordinator, SDSU has finished among the nation's leaders in total defense, rushing defense, and passing efficiency defense. We want to welcome Coach Kurt Mattix, defensive coordinator at San Diego State, to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
So we want to talk about obviously last year's team and look forward to the upcoming season. But just want to get some background on how you might have ended up at San Diego State. I believe your first encounter with Coach Hoke was at Ball State in 2003 when he was hired as a first-time head coach, and you were already a GA there. What has remained true about Coach Hoke's approach over the last 20 years?
Wow, what a great question to start with. First of all, I would say just number one is the type of person he is. He is an amazing husband. He's an amazing father. He's an amazing leader of men. His work ethic is second to none. His pursuit to try to help take people from where they might be currently at and try to raise their level of performance. He's great as a teacher and is willing to help people along the journey that might ask, like, hey, what's the best way to coach this, or what's the best way to recruit. I've always looked at him as a mentor. When I was at, job A or B, I reached out to him and said, hey, would this be a better job, or would this be something that you would recommend me doing, with the hopes of trying to get back with him at some point, and always lending advice. Again, he's a culture builder, a program builder from the standpoint of understanding that it's a process, and understanding that people are the most important people in the process as far as how you treat them. And again, I could go on forever, Andre, about what Coach Hoke means to me, but he's a very special man.
When he was first hired at San Diego State in 2009, I believe I read somewhere that you attended spring practice to try to get a better feel for the 3-3-5 and to learn from Coach Long. Why did you decide to do that?
Well, it a lot dependent was where I was at currently in my profession. And it was one of those things where the job I was at the time was St. Joseph's College. And they happened to run a 3-3-5. But the funny thing is their 3-3-5 was a little bit different than Coach Long's 3-3-5. So a guy by the name of Coach Castile, I think it is, that's been at West Virginia for a while. I think he might be back at West Virginia for a little bit. I would say is a little bit more of a zone coverage 3-3-5 scheme with blitzes and different things, but mostly zone principles coverage wise. And when I came out and studied with Coach Long, there was some zones to it, but there was also a lot of man principles. And so what I learned out here was obviously just different ways to do things and different ways to incorporate blitzes, and then the opportunity to understand the man principles or man coverage concepts behind it. So we were able to take a lot of those things back and utilize those things at St. Joseph's College.
So after Coach Hoke went to Michigan, you joined him there as a defensive quality control coach. What exactly was that role, and what did you take from that experience?
Well, the first and foremost, when I was currently out of a job, and so we were let go at Ball State. And so it was, Coach Hoke giving me an opportunity to continue staying in this profession. It was sort of like, hey, should I go back to coach high school football, which I have a teacher's degree or education degree, and as well as, still want to coach high school football, or what I really wanted to do is try to stay in college. And it was sort of like, time frame wise and, networking and things weren't going the way I was hoping it would be. But, Coach Hope gave me the opportunity to stay in it. And it just so happened to be at one of the premier schools in all of America. It's one of the, you would say, maybe blue bloods of college football. And so the opportunity to come out and interview, the opportunity to come out and be a part of that program, to me really changed my life in a perspective of, a guy by the name of Greg Madison, who was his defensive coordinator at the time, really helped mold me even more as a coach, along with working with Coach Hope, as far as how to call a game, how to prepare to call a game, and how to study an opponent. But it just was one of those things where he knew, from my experience, how I could help, knew that I was a full-time coach, knew that it was one of those things where I could help on the side with, development and different things of that nature. But a lot of it was behind the scenes, breaking down film, creating playbooks, creating tapes for coaches to study and say, hey, this is what you need to learn in order to best prepare yourself for that game. Coach Hoke still coached the defensive line at Michigan at times. And so as he's doing head coach's duties, he would be like, hey, make me a practice tape that I need to watch with the kids, and so I would be able to make that for him and get everything ready. So when this meeting came, notes would be ready, film would be ready, and he'd be able to go into that meeting without really having the time to really prepare for it just because of the other duties that he had.
That's incredible. You obviously preceded stops at San Diego State. You were at Valpo, Eastern Kentucky. And you were mentioning before some of the philosophical differences with studying the 3-3-5. Now that you've done it for a few years, and how would you say you differ from Coach Long and the approach that he had before?
Wow. First of all, I consider Coach Long and Coach Hoke the godfathers of the system. They back together back at Oregon State. I think it was in '83. Coach Hoke and I were talking about that at some other time when they realized, like, hey, from a personnel standpoint at Oregon State, they could get multiple athletes, but they might not be able to fit in the puzzle of a 4-3 or a 3-4. But if we could be like Joe Lee Dunn was at Mississippi State at the time, with a group of random, really good athletes, and just put them into that puzzle, hopefully they could confuse and use their athletic ability. And so learning it, studying it, and seeing how Coach Long consistently evolved, and obviously Coach Hope stepped away from this system and learned other ones. And I've been in this system for 2 years, but have been in lots of other ones, and trying to take and piece together some things that we really liked at Michigan, some things I really liked at EKU. But to me, it's not so much maybe about the system that we have. It's about the kids really buying in to what our expectations are of how hard we want to play on every play, the fundamentals and techniques that we coach with and that prepare them for that play, and how hard they're willing to play for their teammates, for the name across their chest, and what they're willing to do on a given play. Coach Hoke and I were just watching some plays of Cam Thomas today, and it was against the Nevada game. And we called a stunt, and Cam actually looped away from the direction the quarterback was going. But on that play, Cam was able to get to Carson Strong and hit him and force a fumble. And it just doesn't make sense because we accidentally looped the wrong way based on the call. He scrambled that way. But because of the effort, because of how hard Cam played, he was able to get a sack fumble. So to me, it's not so much about the scheme we do. It's learning more and more about how hard we play and getting the kids to buy in that if you play hard every single play, as hard as you can play, we got somebody right behind you that's going to come in right after you and play just as hard. He might not be as talented, but he's going to play just as hard. And now all of a sudden we have 22 guys playing as hard and as violent and as tough as we can play. And I think that's what I've learned as much as anything. Yes, you have to have good players. Don't get me wrong. Keyshawn Banks, Jonah Tavai, Trent Thompson, Patrick McMorris, Hawkins, Taylor Hawkins, Caden McDonald. We have some really good players that are really good character kids. But if you turn on the film, hopefully you're seeing how hard they try to play on each play. And that to me is the biggest key to the success we've had, as much as it is the 3-3-5 or maybe this blitz. Now, It's also knowing what plays we can get Cam one-on-one or getting Jonah Tavai one-on-one in a matchup that we feel that they can exploit and be able to be successful in too, trying to get that as much as we can to dictate to the offense. Hey, if we could get Jonah Tavai one-on-one 4 times and he wins 3 out of the 4, let's keep doing that concept.
So you coach during games, you coach you sit in the press box, and some coordinators are on the sideline, some in the press box. Can you talk about kind of your rationale of why you prefer to sit in the box and what benefits that bring?
Yeah, great question. I love to be in the box. First of all, because sometimes if things don't go well, I lose my composure real quick, and then I'm able to gain it back. And so from the reality is you don't want to like get too mad and be emotionally driven. So being in a press box, it's a good environment. You have your call sheets all over you. There's a lot of coaches like Coach Long, for example, as I've studied him, he calls his calls without a call sheet. I mean, he memorizes and knows what he wants. I'm a guy that needs my call sheet in front of me. I know what I do, but just to make sure it's clear and concise based on certain down and distances and situational, how we prepare our call sheet. But it allows me to see the big picture, allows me to focus in on what I need to see, hopefully be able to make as many adjustments that might need to go on in the game and be able to see a big picture perspective where sometimes on the field, your vision isn't as good as you might want it to be. Now, from an emotional standpoint, you need guys on the sideline like Kyle Hoke and Jordan Thomas and, Coach Brady Hoke, our head coach who is still active on our defensive line and defensive staff. I use them as the emotional roller coaster that get them hype and get them excited, ready to go and give the clear message that needs to go between each series. But for me, it's able to see what I need to see, be clear and concise, as well as not get distracted with, some things that could happen on the sidelines.
We had Segun Alubi on a podcast on a prior episode. He kind of described the 2021 defense maybe more of a 4-2-5 with Caden Mcdonald kind of playing that fourth rusher. Would you say that's a fair assessment? Is that more a philosophy, or is that more just talent on the team? And could Caden's brother Cooper kind of fill that role as well this year?
I think it's a lot depend, Andre, as far as who we're playing and what they're trying to do. If you go back and you watch the Nevada game, I think you're going to see a different defense based on what Carson Strong is able to do. If you go back and maybe watch San Jose, we're going to be a little bit different, especially towards the end of the game when they decide to get into their bigger personnel and try to run the ball on us. So I think when in doubt, you're exactly right with the statement of, Caden was our fourth rusher. I would say the majority, probably 85% of the time in our 4-man front stuff. But what we're going to try to do is have the capability of doing a lot of things. And then based on what we feel going into that opponent or going into that week, we're going to say, this is what's going to give us the best chance to be successful. It might be against Boise. If you noticed, we played a lot of 3-man front, brought Andrew Alecki, Cedric Lakalaka, and Mike Shawcroft a lot as our fourth rusher. And Caden played off the ball because of just what they presented that week in our preparation, what we felt like, hey, this might give them issues. And, we obviously the first half was a little bit different than the second half. But that being said, it was still somewhat what we feel was successful. And then, even like UNLV, we went into UNLV saying, hey, this, we struggled a little bit in coverage. Not, we weren't happy about that, but we had to adjust a little bit as far as what we wanted to do because they were getting the ball thrown over our head a little bit. So we had to adjust some coverage things, which made us a little bit lighter in the box to stop the run, even though Williams is a heck of a back. It just so circumstantial. Each opponent presents its own deal. So from Alubi's perspective, I would agree. We look maybe like a 4-2-5 a little bit with maybe Pat McMorris being like a nickel or Trenton being the nickel in that with rushing for the 3D lineman and Caden. But I think each game is going to be a little bit different depending on how you study us from that standpoint.
Yeah, one of the things I also noticed for the defensive front is kind of some unconventional ways, right? Like Jonah Tavai at times was, 4 feet off the ball running to at the snap. In the Frisco Bowl, I believe he was lined up so far outside the tackle that he was almost, opposite the slot receiver,
Sure.
comes and gets a sack. So where does that stuff come from? And like, how fun is it to devise that stuff and then see it actually, be successful?
It's amazing. And again, having a guy like Coach Hoke, that has allows us to think outside the box, that allows us to try to tinker with some things and go back to like Jonah Tavai. You're sitting here saying, well, that's your nose guard or tackle. Well, if you watch him on his recruiting film and watch him carry the ball as a rugby football player, you're like, holy cow, he's a good athlete too. So it's putting people in positions that we think can be successful and thinking outside the box. But, that package itself was something that, Greg Madison created while we were at Michigan. And so, just using and going back to some ideas that we had some athletes that were able to, sort of fit the same dynamics of some of the things that we were doing at Michigan. And again, is, certain teams going to go all the way back to when we were at Michigan. And we've done that package before. We try to, again, piecemeal or sit here and say, hey, this could be good against this team and maybe not so much against that. Because again, just like anything, they're going to watch the film. And if they sit here and see us do this, they're going to prepare for that. Well, now make them prepare for it, but don't show it to them. Excuse me. They're going to be frustrated that they worked all week on that concept and you didn't show it to them. So it's a little bit about gamesmanship, but again, ultimately knowing the strengths and weaknesses of our guys. Again, I take Jonah Tavai. I think he's an extremely, really talented athlete. And so if we can get him a little bit of a head start and get running, now all of a sudden he's a rolling bowl of butcher knives that can, really cause a lot of trouble as he's running through the A or B gaps and cause some mismatches.
I need that again. He's a rolling what?
Ball of butcher knives.
That's perfect. So as you head into spring camp, looking towards 2022, what are you most focused on? Whether it's improving statistically in one area or a particular position group.
I would say it's a combination of a lot of things. I wouldn't say so much statistically, Paul, but I would say, I'm going to look to my right at our depth chart. It's, seeing what Justice Tavai can do. It's seeing what Devin Lamp, a transfer for Tulsa, can do. It's seeing, where our perfect combination at linebacker, the three best linebackers are. Where does Cooper fit in? Which, I think, Andre, you brought him up. He's doing a great job right now in winter conditioning, and we're excited to have him. And, the funny thing is he's very similar to Caden, but he's bigger. So we're excited to see what he can do. Don't tell Caden I said that, though. He'll be mad. But then, ultimately see where we're at defensive back. I mean, we're having to replace Trent and Hawk, who have a significant amount of snaps. And then you take Noah Avenger, which we call, and Noah Tumblin and Dallas Branch. I feel like those are three good corners, but they all didn't perform at the high level that we wanted them to throughout the season, but they all performed very well at different points of the season. Who can solidify that starting role, heading into fall camp? So I think it's more depth chart finding who maybe we can find maybe specialty roles for. A guy like Garrett Fountain, where can he fit in? He, did some really good things this past year, really come into his own, did some really good stuff on special teams. Now trying to find a more significant role on defense. Vi Cajo, another young linebacker that's played a lot of snaps on special teams. Where does he fit in? And like I said, there's a couple other really young guys, that we're excited about that, again, I don't necessarily know what they can do, but they're running really well right now in winter conditioning, moving around. And again, I'm going to stress this. If we can create 22 kids, and I'll even take more, but if you can create 2 deep at every position and constantly try to have good depth and rotation, now you're sitting here cooking with grease from the standpoint of you can continue to play as hard as you can and not try to be like, hey, don't run to the ball in this one because we really need you to be fresh throughout 60 to 80 snaps a game. Hey, now you're only playing 40. Well, you want to play more snaps? Well, go get 15 more on special teams. Now you're at 55 snaps a game. That's a pretty good game. Now our special teams improve too. So you're playing a role on defense. You're playing a role in special teams. And for the most part, you have some guys that are constantly hungry about knowing that if they perform well, they might be the starter, and constantly trying to create competition and depth from that.
Yeah, I think Charlie Brewer, quarterback, Utah, is still having nightmares of Garrett Fountain.
Oh, jeez.
A great game. But tell me a little bit more, I guess, just about the tension between finding 22. But if you got Cam Thomas as an example, you don't want him rotating. I mean, he needs to play as many possible snaps as he can. So could you just talk a little bit about that tension and
Sure.
kind of where you land on, these star players and getting them on the field?
Okay, so Paul, what I'm going to tell you is what we'll try to do as a game goes on is we're going to try to sub him out on first and second down in a series. And then he'll be back on the field on third, a critical down. Now we gave somebody else 2 snaps and we took that off of Cam. Now in the fourth quarter, now he can play a little bit longer in the fourth quarter, critical situations, because we were able in the first quarter and the second quarter, even into the third, take a couple start of a series plays off of him and do that. So again, we're talking, if we could give Cam, like you're saying, perfect game being 80 snaps, if Cam is playing, 65 to 70 of those 80 snaps, he's not going to be as effective as the season goes on. He might be elite in that first game, but as the season goes on, or maybe when we get into conference, when we need him to play at that high level, now his body is breaking down, the wear and tear of just getting pounded. I mean, go back to Air Force. Again, love what the Naval Academy or the Air Force Academy represents, but they beat us up. Even though we won the game, it's just the physical nature of getting cut on every play and to play in those blocks that it had a residual effect going into the next week against Fresno. And, just the health and safety of the kids, that nothing was wrong. It's just that's the process. And they played a lot of snaps in that game because they played well. But the more that you can create that in a situation where, hey, and I'm not saying first and second aren't critical downs, but if you can sit here and say, hey, I can spell Nasir Sims on first and second down for Jonah, then Jonah comes back in on third. And then if we get off the field, we were able to only get one rep for that series. And then that same next series, we're going to do the same thing. Now, Nasir has 4. Jonah's only played 2. He's even going to be more snaps in the fourth quarter as long as everything stays status quo and we're playing pretty good defense. And the mix matching of that. So Coach Hoke and Coach Thomas sitting here saying, okay, we're going to have Keyshawn and Jonah on the field. We'll take Cam off. And then the next series, it'll be Cam and then Keyshawn. Jonah will be off. And then the next, it will, to try to mix mash that group. And then at linebackers, we did it based on series. So it was Shawcroft, Alecki, and Caden to start. And then, Garrett Fountain would come in on the third series, no matter what, good or bad, because, trying to give Caden some breaks because of just rushing a passer, just that realm. And what that does is it makes Garrett hungrier because he wants more snaps. It forces Caden to know, hey, I got to be on point just to keep making plays so that I don't lose more snaps in the game. And again, I think, in my opinion, like one of the greatest dynasties besides currently Alabama, as I go back to USC with Pete Carroll and the depth that they had at those positions, I think that's what made them that championship caliber team year in, year out, because it was just a plug and go from that standpoint.
Speaking of Cam Thomas, where do you see his ideal fit at the next level? Do you think he's a 4-3 end, or is he more of a 3-4, maybe kick inside next to an outside linebacker?
That's a great question. Again, I'm going to say that's a above my pay grade decision. But wherever Cam goes, I promise you that program is going to be lucky they have him. Salt of the earth type young man, hard worker, constant competitive individual, never, ever missed anything from the standpoint of like meetings or practice or anything, always in here trying to get better. Not only are we going to miss Cam's performance on a football field, we're going to miss just his character and what he represented on a daily basis. And I'm also going to say that's Zach Thomas too. His parents did an amazing job in raising those two young men, and we're fortunate enough to have them.
Yeah, definitely. The brothers is a big theme at San Diego State.
No question.
Past and present for sure.
Sure.
So the last question we have is more about the secondary and maybe the fluidity of the positions. You've had cornerbacks turn into safeties, like Barfield. You've had safeties turn into corners like Hawkins.
Sure.
How much fluidity is there between corner and Warrior and Aztec? Are you looking for the 5 best players and putting them out there, or is the positions more different that you need to have certain skill sets?
Sure. I think, again, without divulging too much information, we are without question going to try to find the 5 best players. That's where we're going to start. And it started last year in our 2020 season when we sat here and said, Taylor Hawkins is one of the 4 best safeties with Dwayne Johnson, with Tariq, Trenton, and Hawk. I mean, those 4 players need to find a way to get on the field. And so we tinkered about, and we also thought Darian Hall was a really good football player at a corner spot. So we sat here and said, how can we work this? And we decided to go a little bit more schematically within a thought process to put Hawk into the boundary as much as we could. And that worked out really well. Now, that being said, we also sat here and said, okay, these are the strengths that Barfield brings to the table. How can we utilize him and put him in a position to be as successful as we want him to do, and what can help our program the best? And so we start out with trying to say, who are the best, 5 defensive backs, who can play, and sort of what that player specific role is for that position. Like Pat McMorris plays our Aztec. Well, that by definition itself is probably one of the deepest, longest list of criteria that they have to be able to do, be able to fit the run, be able to play zone coverage, be able to play man coverage, be able to cover deep third, be able to cover deep half. So that's got to be one of your elite, if not top athletes you have on a football field, as well as pretty smart, because he's got to be able to communicate and make some adjustments as needed. So that probably is where it starts. And then, our best cover guys more likely going to go to the corner spots. And then from there, probably Field Warrior would be the 3rd best corner or 3rd best cover guy, which it was Tariq for 4 seasons in a row. We moved Trenton there, and Trenton went from being a even voted all-conference member to a first-team all-conference player. So hats off to Trent, hats off to Kyle Hoke, our safeties coach, for making that recommendation last spring. And obviously there was a learning curve, and he got frustrated at times because, again, he's covering the best player usually in the slot. And that's what Tariq did for 4 seasons for us, which he was second to none. Awesome. And so Trent came in and filled those shoes and did a great job. And obviously in every game, you're not going to play perfect, but, to earn first team all conference in 1 season playing it, that's the respect that we felt like the rest of the conference had for him. And then our boundary warrior is a player that might be a little bit more in the box at times in a run game. And that was Barfield / Baskerville, who came in towards the end of the second half of the season and really showed, being 6'3", 200 some pounds or 190, depending on whether he ate breakfast or not, as far as, what he weighs on a, daily basis, to be able to be more of a physical player down the box and all that stuff. But Andre, you're exactly right. We'll start with the best cover guys, and then from there, piecemeal it together. And then, the carryover learning, Coach Sumler, our corners coach, and Coach Kyle Hoke, safeties coach, they do a lot of stuff together. And we're sitting in practice and we're like, okay, Des Malone is playing safety. Well, he's covering really well. Let's move him to corner and see what he could do. Next thing you know, he's, backing up, at corner. And right now this spring going to be competing for a starting job this fall camp, so it's just trying to find what maybe they do best and put them in a position to do that over and over in order to try to master that position.
We could sit here and listen to you talk defense for hours, but
all day.
I know our time is up, and we definitely appreciate you taking the time and chatting with us, giving us a lot of insight, and we look forward to chatting with you again.
Absolutely. And again, I just want to stress, thank you for all you guys do. Thank you for the publications that you put out. Thank you for your support of our team, our coaches, our players. And I promise you that without you guys, constantly trying to push San Diego State football, we wouldn't be where we're at. So thank you guys.
Thank you very much. We had a great interview with Coach Kurt Mattix. Paul, the defense had a phenomenal season in 2021, and they're primed for yet another one. What were your main takeaways from our discussion with Coach Maddox?
I think for me, the more that I think that I understand what he's doing, the less that I do. He's starting to sound more and more like Rocky Long did, wanting to have 22 players who can sub in and they can play with that full Aztec mentality, running to the ball, completely empty themselves out. And then somebody else is going to come in and they're going to do the same thing. And so I think that wanting that as like the standard and the goal is really interesting, because Coach Hoke talks about that the best player is going to play, but it seems like in the defense, the two best players at each position are going to play. And what does that do for the competition level? We spoke with Coach Goff, and he talked about how people who didn't really have that opportunity to play when they were down the depth chart, they weren't asking as many questions. They weren't as sharp in the study rooms, etc. And so on defense, that completely takes that away. Because there's going to be so many people playing. And then you run into what we're going to see this upcoming year, where you have a lot of people who have played. They're losing a lot of players from 2022, but yet the people that are going to be behind them have also played a lot of football. And if they can continue to do that, there shouldn't be the drop off that you're going to see or that we're seeing, on the offensive side of the ball, where there's so many people to be replaced. So I think that was pretty significant. And there's more, man, but let's keep the conversation going. What did you see?
I think just the depth and the knowledge of the defense is evident. It's evident in press conferences, but it's even more evident when we have him for a longer discussion. I thought it was interesting how he was talking about how they utilized Cam Thomas last year, taking him off on some first and second down, so he's fresher for third downs. And then those two plays that he would miss in the first quarter, the second quarter, the third quarter, then you get to the fourth quarter, those 6 or 7 or 6 to 10 plays he missed, he gets to play and he's fresher. And so I thought that was really critical that we saw. We saw them substitute not just Cam, but Keyshawn and Jonah throughout the first early part of the game. And there were some games where in the fourth quarter, those guys were wreaking havoc on the quarterbacks. I also thought it was really interesting that he was talking when we asked him why he sits in the press box. And the first answer was to because he's emotional and it helps him, he can be emotional in the press box and then take the time to calm himself and then go and get on the headset and talk to the players or the coaches on the field. I thought that was a very honest answer, but I appreciated that because it seemed like that was a legitimate. Obviously, there's benefits to being up there, being able to see the whole field, getting the telecommunications, the videos, things like that, and then having the coaches on the field being his like kind of liaisons, right? Kyle Hoke, he mentioned Demetrius Sumler, Jordan Thomas, things like that. So I thought just his versatility, the way he's versatile with his defense, his calls, whether he's in man, he's in zone, they're blitzing, they're rushing three, even some of the unconventional things they did with their front three with Jonah, I thought it was really interesting. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how the next level of that versatility and that unconventional style.
Yeah, I don't know why I keep piggybacking with the comments that Coach Goff was talking about, but it reminded me about what you were talking about. To reminded me something that he said, and he talked about how important it is to know your strengths and your weaknesses. That and I thought that was a really interesting idea because normally we think about eliminating our weaknesses. And in what their philosophy is that you know your weaknesses, that you're, not as athletic as this person. So if you get too far away from where you're supposed to be, that's where you get in trouble. Or if you're not as athletic, so your feet better be right on where they need to be because you don't have the ability to make up for it. And then to see maybe a weakness, right? I mean, he doesn't want to be that emotional. He doesn't, but he knows who he is as a man. He knows where he is, and he's comfortable with, compensating for that. And I thought I agree. That was really good. And then, I think the relationships that he talked about with Coach Hoke and your first question, by the way, absolutely great question. But just being able to say what's been true about Coach Hoke when he started, and it's the same thing that you've seen over the last 2 decades. And for him to talk about, he takes people, he cares about people. He understands that the most important part of this entire process is people. And again, that's just, you can't plan for people. People are unpredictable. People are, they can't be broken down into statistics. It's just not the world that we live in, no matter how much people want to say it. I mean, being a people person and, being authentic is a technique, not something that's sincere. And for him to see it in all these different places and the respect that he has for him, I thought that was really neat and just helpful to understand, why so many great coaches want to be around Brady Hoke, and why they're able to do so well. I also thought that it was good for him to talk about just the different ideas of how he sets up his defenses and how he is constantly playing that cat and mouse game where you want to show the offense, you want to show them something on film, have them practice for it, and then you don't use it again. And so Jonah Tavai sitting out there, splitting out as a linebacker, that we might not see that for Jonah's the rest of his career, but because of how successful it was, they're going to practice and they're going to say, if you see this, like, you still need to account for him, pay attention to the big guy who's going outside. And then finally, I think I really thought it was cool how he talked about the DBs that they're looking for and that they're looking for the 5 best. And however it shakes out that those 5 come about, that's what they're going to do. And so you start looking through the DBs and, he mentioned by name, he mentioned the 3 corners who all played really well, but they didn't get to that elite level that they need. Well, what if all 3 of them do? Well, then all 3 of them will be on the field. You know what I mean? And I think that's a really interesting thing. And how all that's going to shake out and how all that's going to move together, is going to be really, really fun to see. And how they're going to line up against Arizona. It could be, they could have 4 safeties that you would think of as being safeties, and 1 corner that's listed as a corner, but those are your 5, right? And they talked about, with Taylor Hawkins being the 4th safety that they wanted to make sure played. And so I think that, again, that breeds that competition, that breeds that go be a football player, go be the best football player, and you're going to see the field for the Aztecs.
Everybody will look at, they're losing Cameron Thomas, who's the Mountain West Defensive Player of the Year, and they think the defense is going to take a step back. I don't necessarily see it that way. Obviously, they're also losing Hawkins and Thompson and Alubi. But I really think this defense has potentially the ability to be better than last year's, both rushing the passer and on the back end. Coach Maddox pointed out, the secondary, they did give up some big plays, more big plays than they wanted to. And some of those games where they could have won by more than they did, and the games were a little bit closer, better secondary play, better pressure up front could have made an impact in those plays. I think talent-wise, with some of the additions that they have, Cooper McDonald, Justice Tavai, Devin Lamp, I think that gives their front a lot more versatility than they had last year. So
I want to devil's advocate, whatever it is. Cam Thomas, there's some people still thinking that he's going to be a 1st round pick. Most of them you see 2nd round, those kind of defenders don't grow on trees at San Diego State. I mean, how do they replace a guy who was not just, I mean, he's not the workout warrior kind of guy, which is why he's going to get a first round. He was productive. I mean, he did everything for the Aztecs. I mean, coach was even talking about how they're watching a play against Carson Strong where they call him loop to the, and we know the play. I mean, It's a nuts play that he is able to run himself back into the play and rush the throw, critical down, plus get the ball, he knocks it out of bounds. It goes out of bounds and for that fumble. And it's amazing that he was able to do that. So how is it, in your opinion, your estimation, that the guys that you just named, the sum of them are going to be able to replace Thomas?
Well, I think you do it two ways. You do it with multiple people, multiple players, and you do it schematically. Great defensive coordinators like Coach Maddox, you can come up with schemes to generate pressure when maybe the player one-on-one individually can't do it, right? So if you come up with a scheme to generate the pressure, plus you've got a collection of guys up front that can work together and execute it, then that's how you could potentially replicate the production that a Cam Thomas had last year. Not saying anybody on the roster is going to be more productive individually than Cam Thomas, but as a collective, I think they can. On some of those plays where the Cam Thomas, Jonah Tavai, Keyshawn Banks came out, the backups, they played well, they made plays, but they were not on the same talent level as those three. This year, I think with the, obviously they lost Cam Thomas, but with Lamp, with Justice Tavai, potentially more of the McDonald brothers rushing more, they can definitely replicate the team production that Cam Thomas helped provide with pressures, hits, sacks, things like that.
No, and I mean, to your point, looking at the roster, senior, junior, senior, junior, and then 3 redshirt freshmen, right? And
with the defensive line,
yeah, that's the defensive line. That's a lot of upperclassmen. That is a lot of players who, have played, who are experienced in the system, and have the potential to be able to make plays. And I can see your point. Like, they might not be as good as Cam Thomas, but does Jonah Tavai have another level in him? Does Keyshawn Banks go from being the guy who makes one unbelievable play a game to a guy who makes one unbelievable play and 5 really good plays that are more expected of him? Do they, by having Justice Tavai and Devin Lamp as their, 4th, 5th, 6th guys, are those guys better than Nieves and Mingali and the other guys who were down on that rotation last year? And so collectively, can they have more of an impact? It'll be interesting to see. It just, it's interesting. I am not in the camp that says that he's going to be able to replace that easily, even with a committee of people. However, if there's a coach who could get the most out of it, I do think it's Kurt Mattix, and I think that's pretty special. But then, keeping with this question, you think that the secondary can be better this upcoming year than it was last year?
Yes.
Tell me about that. Because they're losing some first team, second team, all conference, and replacing them with clearly guys who were not up to their level last year.
Right, but didn't they lose 3 starters and all conference players the year before as well?
Were they as good?
Yeah, Tariq Thompson, Dwayne Johnson Jr., and Darren Hall. Yeah, Darren Hall starting safety for the Falcons.
Oh, no, my point is, were they as good in 2021 as they were in 2020?
Well, in 20, statistically, no.
Right.
But they were pretty close. And I think 2020 was an interesting year with COVID, playing only 8 games, no non-conference schedule. The schedule was kind of in flux. Actually, they did play, end up playing Colorado, I believe, and BYU. So there was. 2020 was an odd year, but statistically, maybe they took a step back, but they won more games. They were a better defense overall, a better team. So yeah, I don't necessarily, especially in the college ranks, every team losing players, right? All the top programs are always losing guys to the NFL, but they've got guys coming in to make their mark right behind them. And I think I'm excited about who they've got in the secondary coming up. Patrick McMorris obviously is still there. CJ Baskerville, Barfield, some of the other guys and younger guys. And I think the corners, Coach Maddox did talk about how they didn't think all three of the corners were consistently good every game throughout the year. But, with another year of off season and spring camp and fall camp, maybe they can be. And so there's, little improve on paper. You could look at it and say, yes, they're losing these guys, and the guys that are replacing them weren't as good last year, but that was last year. This is a new year. There's growth in everybody, right? I think talent-wise, I think the secondary could be better this year. Will they be? We'll find out in the fall.
Yeah, and I think that's another kind of part of this whole puzzle with San Diego State is they were more susceptible and have been over the last, even with all of this success, they have been susceptible to not being able to replace elite players. Obviously when Donald Pumphrey left, Penny replaced him and did really well. But then after that, they haven't been able to, there was a huge drop off when he left. And I think that same thing that happened in the secondary, you missed players that were there, and you have their replacements, and they're gritty and they're good, and they're great Aztecs and everyone enjoys watching them, but their level is not the same. And I think that obviously with Hawkins and Thompson both playing in showcase bowls, I think that, and obviously doing well in them, shows that they were at a great talent level. Maddox mentioned Trent Thompson a bunch in the conversation because I think that is a real key position. I think it's a real key, whoever that third DB is, who's going to handle whoever that best player is in the slot. And they've done really, really well with Tariq Thompson and then Trenton Thompson last year, and being able to find whoever that person is might be more important than finding the number one corner, because as you said, No Avenger learned a nickname. That's always fun. No Avenger, and Dallas Branch and Noah Tumblin, they all played well at times. And so you kind of feel like they can play pretty good still, but who that third one is, whoever is going to be covering in that slot, because it's a different skill set. And, it's really an interesting way to do it, a way to try to find who that is. And I'm just not sure who that person is. I mean, the fact that Thompson was able to wrestle that so much away from Barfield just leaves me with a question, like, can he be a cornerback on the outside? I thought he did okay in 2020 as a corner on the outside, but it's being in the slot. It's just a different animal. And who's that going to be, who can play that position, or, if they have to run more zone or things like that. I just don't know that they can just easily replace people. Which leaves us at linebacker, right? We haven't talked about linebacker. We didn't actually talk to the linebacker coach, which is weird. We talked to the linebacker coach and didn't really talk to him about linebackers. But what do you see from the linebacker position? And, when trying to compare the two defenses, could there be the strength of the team be right there in the middle among that group?
Definitely. I would definitely say that. Obviously, the Caden Mcdonald, we all know about him. whether he's, rushing on the line or dropping back and playing linebacker. The Michael Shawcroft, I think he's poised to be a big breakout player.
Mm-hmm.
Some people were quick to jump on our spring camp storyline and say he's already a great player.
I think they misunderstood that. They misunderstood that. Yes, he's a great player, but he's not an NFL guy.
Yeah. No, I think what you meant is he going to take that leap to become this full permanent starter that's playing every down or almost every down, and taking that leap with Segun Olubi and Andrew Leckie gone. He's going to have that opportunity. We also obviously have Cooper McDonald in here. Curious to see how they utilize him. Cedric Lakalaka, I think is back. I think it's going to be the strength of the team because they have the experience as well. And then they've got some young guys. Vi Cajo, he's a guy we heard a lot about in the spring. Saw him sparingly during the season because he was playing behind, seniors and guys who were really experienced and really good. So I can see him having that. I think Segun talked about him as somebody that's going to step into a role next year. So it definitely become the strength of the team along with the defensive front.
Yeah. And it'll be interesting to see how all of this works out. Obviously Caden McDonald, he got that. What's the right phrase? He talked about Maddox talked about the substitution patterns and how, to keep McDonald fresh, no matter what, they substituted Garrett Fountain and brought him in no matter what. I think that for the I think it would be great for the Aztecs if Shawcroft, Lakalaka, Caden McDonald forced that kind of substitution package for this defense, that they were so much better than everybody else that and what I mean by that is, if they get to that next level and they do get onto that NFL radar, and obviously assume Caden is there, but they get to that next level and they're able to do some of those things, then I think they can compensate for maybe some of the losses elsewhere. But I think if you go into the season and you're having that same rotation, right, where they're splitting time like you saw last year and things like that, I think that might be a sign that the growth from the linebackers didn't happen. And so I think that's going to be a huge thing. And, just for the record, I think Michael Shawcroft, he's a great player, was not trying to imply otherwise, but I think there's growth in his game. And I think with the injuries that he's had, missing a little bit of time, having the wrap on it, the cast on his hand, all those kind of things add up, and has not quite gotten to that point where I think his ceiling is. And I think that his ceiling is that he can have his name called and be drafted. And he's so instinctual. And he plays with great intelligence that they really need him to take that next level. And that I think he's capable of taking.
One other name I'll throw out there is Dominic Oliver.
There you go.
Redshirt freshman. He was the guy who said he wants to break the all-time sack record at San Diego State, KGB's record, which I believe is 34 and a half, something like that. And to have a chance to break that record, you got to pretty much play, 4 seasons. And, he redshirted last year as a freshman, true freshman. So now he's a redshirt freshman. Curious to see how he does in spring camp, whether he can elevate himself into kind of that, top two depth chart, 2 deep, where he can get on the field for some snaps during the season, because he's a talented guy. He can bring his speed, power off the edge, so he can play that same Caden McDonald role where he gets up and he becomes the 4th guy rushing off the edge, or he can potentially drop back into coverage. So it's another name to look at. He's still a redshirt freshman, and there's still a lot of guys ahead of him seniority wise. But I'll be interested to see what kind of impact he can make moving up the depth chart after spring camp.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, obviously, we remembered, you wrote a really great article on him before he stepped onto campus. That dude was explosive on his high school tape, and it's a great problem to have. I mean, I think that's what Coach Maddox talked about over and over. It's a great problem to have, right? I mean, you wanting to figure out how all of these pieces fit. I think the defense will once again be the strength of the team. I think having the expectation that it will be as good as last year's team is really high. It's a really, really high and maybe an unrealistic expectation. But I will say that when I put out on Twitter that potentially the defense could be as good as last year's defense, Caden Mcdonald was quick to remind me that they want to be better and that they're going to be pushing to be better. And as you say, if they clean up some of those big plays, broken coverages, even just doing that, they don't have to be as good in the short yardage and in the other ways. But if they clean up that, they could be a better overall defense, because that was the real big Achilles heel of the group in 2021.
So Aztecs spring camp starts February 28th and goes on until March 24th, which is the day of the spring game. So a lot will come of what happens in spring camp, and we're curious to see how the depth charts play out and how the spring game plays out. So hopefully you enjoyed our interview with Coach Maddox and our discussion about the defense. We will talk to you guys next time. You are listening to the SDSU Football Podcast, presented by the East Village Times, with your hosts Andre Hagverdian and Paul Garrison.